Let's talk now to the Shadow Paymaster General, Jonathan Ashworth, who's here to discuss waiting times targets in the NHS. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Morning.
We'll come to NHS in a moment.
Sure.
I wanted to start where we did with the government minister this morning, and just this issue with China and the hack of the MOD supplier. If this is China, a state actor, would Labour name them?
Well, it's clearly a very serious situation. It was right for the Minister, the Secretary of State, to come to the Parliament yesterday and update MPs. One of the things that we've said we would do if we got elected would be immediately have an audit of all UK-China relations. China is a strategic challenge. At the same time, China is also a big part of the global economy, and we have bilateral trade arrangements with them. But equally, a Labour government would always take national security as our absolutely number one priority. It has to be protecting our citizens. There can be no compromise on that. So, look, it's important that all of this is looked at very seriously and very carefully, and we have to do more as a nation to protect ourselves from these very serious cyber attacks. We've had this one, reports of this one yesterday. We've had other reports in recent times. I think the Electoral Commission, for example, was targeted. We are going to see more of this. So we need to take all measures, all action that we can to protect ourselves.
Does the size of a trading partner influence whether they're right or wrong?
No, it doesn't, but it's a recognition of the global economy that we're in, of course, but it is why we have also said we would have a full audit of all our relations with China. And don't misunderstand me, there will be no compromise on national security under a Labour government. I'm just making the point that we have to fully understand all of the relationships that we have between China, and that's why we would audit that if we were to get elected, and we would do that audit within the first 100 days of a Labour government.
I wanted to talk a bit about the Middle East, and I'm sure you've seen the news that we've been discussing, that the US has paused a weapons export to Israel in light of a ground invasion potentially coming in Rafah. Is that a good, measured warning to Israel, and is it something that Labour would consider if they were in government as well?
I think that's a very significant and important intervention from the United States. But let me just make a broader point, because I'm very fortunate to represent the diversity of Leicester, where very many of my Muslim constituents have been rightly disappointed and felt that the political process in the UK has failed to express their legitimate demands for peace, for an end to killing, for a ceasefire, something I've been calling for some months. And when we look at what is happening in Rafah, that is catastrophic. And a full military intervention into Rafah would be completely catastrophic when we know that already so many thousands of women and children, so many thousands of Palestinians, including thousands of women and children, have been killed. We need an immediate ceasefire as a matter of urgency. The international community has got to bring one around. When it comes to the issues of arms embargoes, we're still demanding that Rishi Sunak provides the legal justification, because if there are breaches of international law, then of course there should be action on arms sales. Of course we need the release of hostages, and we need humanitarian aid to get into Gaza. And ultimately, my constituents rightly say to me, my Muslim constituents, they rightly say to me, we need initiatives to bring about peace and a recognition of an independent Palestinian state as part of a two-state solution.
I mean, it's interesting that you're saying what your constituents are saying to you, they're rightly saying to you, also describing, I think you used the word catastrophic, for further action by Israel in Rafah. If there was further action in Rafah, would that be sufficient for you to bang on the door of your boss, Keir Starmer, and say, we have to withdraw support for Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Well, we have been very critical of ministers in that government who have spoken out using extreme language. We've condemned them. We've called for an immediate ceasefire for some time now. We continue to make those calls. We continue to say that an intervention into Rafah should not go ahead. It would be catastrophic. That is the position of Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. David Lammy has rightly raised questions around arms sale and was doing so again yesterday in the House of Commons. We need to bring around about peace. We've got to get a ceasefire. We've got to get release of hostages. And we've got to get the aid in there. In the end, you need international initiatives to bring about a lasting peace in that part of the world, and that includes an independent Palestinian state as part of a two-state solution.
On the flip side, is Rishi Sunak right to invite vice-chancellors of universities to Downing Street to discuss the potential increase of anti-Semitism on university campuses?
If there is... our Jewish students, no, I said I shouldn't say if, we know that Jewish students are feeling intimidated on campus and their safety has to be prioritised. Also, of course, it's understandable that many students, when they see what's going on in this part of the world, want to demonstrate, want to demand peace, want to demand a ceasefire, want to bring about a lasting peace via a Palestinian state and a two-state solution. So there has to be a way to allow both demonstration and allow students to speak out, but also safeguarding the safety of Jewish students. I'm sure it is possible to do both. I'm very lucky to have two universities in my own constituency, Leicester University and De Montfort University. I know the vice-chancellors there will be working very hard to allow legitimate expression and demands for peace, as well as working hard to ensure that Jewish students do not feel intimidated or feel that their safety is at risk or that they're subject to any anti-Semitism.
I know you wanted to come today to talk about NHS waiting lists, and the numbers are very stark, and I'm sure you'll have some of them for us. I guess my big question on this is the extent to which you think waiting lists can be cut in the first year, let's say, of a Labour government simply by better execution of policy, or is this needing a wholesale change and much more funding with it for the health service?
Well, remember, the last Labour government brought waiting lists down from 18 months to 18 weeks, the waiting time. Look, we know that people are waiting longer at the moment for a hip operation, a knee operation. People are struggling to see a GP. You can't get a dentist for love nor money. Young people are being denied desperate mental health care, when they're in the most desperate of circumstances. We've proposed to fully tax the super wealthy non-doms, use the proceeds of that to deliver 2 million more appointments in the NHS. We believe that will begin bringing down waiting times because we're providing more procedures, including more dentistry appointments, as well as more mental health care appointments. It can be done, but it would all be at risk, if I may say so, and I'm going to say this, that with Jeremy Hunt yesterday said his position on abolishing national insurance is government policy, not a long-term ambition, government policy. That opens up a £46 billion black hole in their plans, which either means taxing pensioners more or cutting the NHS. And that is the policy of the Tories now. So we've got a plan to fix their National Health Service. Contrast that with the Tories, who are threatening a £46 billion cut to either the NHS or pensioners paying more in tax. And
just finally, I wanted to ask you about John Swinney in Scotland and whether you fear an area where it's predicted Labour will make gains in the general election. You fear he might galvanise support once again for the SNP?
Well, I mean, look, in the same way we've had chaos under 14 years of the Conservatives in Westminster, it's been chaos in Scotland. And we're talking about the NHS. The NHS in Scotland is in a dire state after the 13 years or so of the SNP government in Scotland. So the NHS is failing. Patients are waiting longer in pain and agony for treatment in Scotland, just as they are in England. And I think we will, in the next general election, be making the case that it's time to turn the page on 14 years of Conservative failure at Westminster, at a national level, UK level, and it's years of failure under the SNP in Scotland as well. And it's time for change there.
Jonathan Ashworth, thanks so much for joining us as always. Good to see you, the Shadow Paymaster General, responding to the government from earlier today. That was Jonathan Ashworth.